fight back. I didn't scream. I just called my real estate attorney on a Tuesday morning, and by Friday the house was under contract. They didn't know until they came home. My name is Sloane. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 4 years, I paid the mortgage on a house I was never allowed to feel comfortable in. Let me back up. I met my husband at a work event in Columbus. He was charming, funny, the kind of guy who remembers your coffee order after the first date. We got engaged after 2 years, and I thought I was marrying him. I didn't fully understand I was also marrying his mother, his sister, and his aunt, all 3 of whom had opinions about everything I did and said nothing useful about anything that mattered. His mother, I'll call her my mother-in-law because that's what she was, legally, for 3 years, was the kind of woman who smiled at you while she was sharpening the knife. She never said anything directly mean to my face. She didn't have to. She had a way of speaking around you like you weren't quite in the room. She'd be telling a story at the dinner table and make eye contact with everyone except me. Not rudely, just consistently. Like I was a fixture. Like I was the lamp in the corner. His sister was louder about it. She made comments about how I cooked. Oh, she's still learning, bless her heart. About how I dressed for Christmas. About how I hadn't given them a baby yet, like that was a shared family project I was behind on. She did it in that particular way Southern adjacent women sometimes do. Wrapped in sweetness so you can't technically object to anything specific, but you walk away from every interaction feeling smaller than when you started. His aunt was the quiet validator. She never said the cruel things herself. She just laughed at the right moments. And my husband, he loved me, I think, in the way that some people love things without actually protecting them. He'd say, "You know how she is." When I tried to tell him something his mother had said, he'd say, "She doesn't mean it like that." When I explained how his sister had spoken to me in front of his cousins at Easter, he was fluent in the language of minimizing, and I stayed because I kept thinking fluency could be unlearned. We bought the house in 2021. It was my idea, actually. I'd saved aggressively through my late 20s. I was a project manager at a healthcare company, steady salary, good at not spending money I didn't have to spend. My husband was in sales, which meant his income was fine in good months and thin in slow ones. The down payment came entirely from my savings account, $42,000. I remember the number exactly because I had watched it accumulate over 6 years, and I moved it out to my account in one wire transfer on a Wednesday afternoon. His name went on the mortgage too because that's how marriage works, and I believed in the marriage. The house was a 4-bedroom in a suburb of Columbus. Nice neighborhood, good school district, more space than 2 people needed. I thought we were building towards something, more people around the table, eventually, a life that expanded. What actually expanded was his family's presence in it. It started with his mother visiting for 2 weeks after we moved in. 2 weeks became a month. The months became a pattern. By year 2, she was staying from November through February every year because, she explained, she didn't like driving in winter where she lived, which was a 4-hour drive away in a town that rarely got more snow than we did. His sister came for a few weeks in the summer and stayed 8. She said she was figuring some things out, which turned out to mean she'd lost her apartment and didn't want to put that plainly. She had her boyfriend with her for 3 of those weeks. They ate my groceries and left dishes in the sink, and I came home from 10-hour workdays to find them watching TV in the living room like they paid for the couch. I bought that couch. I'm not saying that to be petty. I'm saying it because it matters. The ownership of things in the house was very clear to me and completely invisible to everyone else. I paid the mortgage. I paid the utilities. I paid for the groceries most months because my salary was consistent and my husband's wasn't. And I did all of this while his family treated the house as a shared family property and treated me like the property manager they hadn't really hired. At Thanksgiving in 2022, his mother made the seating arrangement. There were 14 people at that dinner. I had cooked for 2 days. I'd made the turkey, 2 kinds of pie, green bean casserole from scratch, rolls from scratch. I'd cleaned the house the day before. I'd bought the extra folding chairs from Target and set them up myself because my husband got busy with something else. I sat at the small table in the kitchen, not because there wasn't room. There was room. Someone could have shifted 6 inches and made space on the main table, but his mother had done the arrangement, and I was placed at the kitchen counter on a bar stool with his younger cousin, who was 12 and not really interested in talking to an adult. No one said anything. My husband glanced at me and I watched him make the calculation, the one where he decided the cost of saying something to his mother was higher than the cost of leaving me where I was. He smiled apologetically and turned back to the table. I sat on that bar stool and ate turkey I had cooked, and listened to my mother-in-law hold court about a family vacation they were planning for the following summer. I hadn't been asked about the vacation. When I mentioned it later that night, my husband said they'd been talking about this trip for years, before I was in the picture, and that it was sort of a family thing. He said it gently. He wasn't trying to be cruel. That was almost worse. The casualness of it, the way my exclusion didn't even register to him as something that needed explaining. The vacation happened the following July. 8 days in Portugal. His mother, his sister, her boyfriend, his aunt, 2 cousins, and my husband. I was not invited. I was not invited either. It simply didn't come up, and when I asked directly, my husband said he thought I'd said I was busy with work that week. I had not said that. I found out later, from an offhand comment his sister made, that they had been planning it for 9 months. I found out about the credit card the same month. I was doing our taxes and I found an account I didn't recognise. It wasn't fraudulent in the criminal sense. My husband had opened it, his name was on it, but he had listed our home address, my income as household income, to get the limit approved, and it had been used almost exclusively by his mother and sister over the previous 8 months. Restaurants, flights, a hotel in Savannah, a spa day that cost $400. The balance was $11,400. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd picked out, the one I'd assembled myself because it came flat-packed and my husband said he'd do it and then didn't, and I looked at that number for a long time. I called my husband. He answered on the 3rd ring. He was at his mother's, visiting for a long weekend. A long weekend I had not been invited to because he'd said when he left it was a quick trip and he didn't want me to have to take time off work. I asked him about the card. There was a pause that told me everything. He said his mother had needed help with some expenses and things had gotten a little out of hand and he'd meant to talk to me about it. I said, "You used my income to get a credit card and then gave it to your mother." He said it wasn't like that. I said, "Tell me what it's like." He said it was complicated and he'd explain when he got home. I hung up. I went for a walk around the neighbourhood. I walked past the houses with lights on inside and thought about how from the outside everything looks like something it might not be. When I got back, I called my sister. She lives in Portland. She's been telling me for 2 years that something was wrong. Not meanly. She's not that kind of sister. She just had a way of asking quiet questions that I didn't want to answer. I answered them that night. She didn't say, "I told you so." She said, "Okay, what do you need?" What I needed was a lawyer. I called a family law attorney in Columbus the next morning. She was clear and practical and didn't waste my time with sympathy I hadn't asked for. We talked about the marriage, the house, the financial situation. She explained what equitable distribution looked like in Ohio. She asked about the down payment, and I told her I had documentation, the bank transfer records, my saving statements from before we were married. She said that was helpful. She also referred me to a real estate attorney. I want to be specific about this part because the video I'm referencing had some confusion in the comments about how this works, and I think it matters to be clear. My name was on the deed. Both of our names were. In Ohio, marital property can be sold during a divorce proceeding with court involvement, but the more straightforward path, when both parties agree, is a negotiated settlement. My attorney advised me on what I was entitled to and what leverage I had. I had significant leverage. The down payment was documented and traceable to my premarital assets. The mortgage payments were documented. The credit card debt was in my husband's name alone. The picture was not flattering to his side. I'm condensing months into sentences here because the actual process of untangling a marriage is slow and bureaucratic and not particularly dramatic. But eventually there was a settlement agreement. The house would be sold. The proceeds, after the mortgage balance would be divided, weighted toward me given the down payment and payment history. The credit card debt was his to resolve. I want to tell you about the day I signed the listing agreement because that part mattered to me. It was a Wednesday in April. I was in my real estate attorney's office and the market was good and the agent said we could list at 380 and probably get over asking. The house had appreciated. It was worth significantly more than we'd paid. That appreciation sat largely in my down payment and 4 years of mortgage payments, and I was going to get most of it back. I signed my name and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happy, exactly, clear. Like a window that had been smudged for years, and someone had finally cleaned it. My husband was living at his mother's by then. We'd separated in February, quietly, without a scene. He'd taken his clothes and his PlayStation and his golf clubs and some kitchen things he picked out, which was fine. He could have them. His mother did not take it quietly. She called me 17 times in 1 week. I know the number because I saved the call log in case I needed it later. She left voicemail saying I was breaking up the family. She said I was vindictive. She said the house was her son's home and I had no right. I didn't return the calls. His sister texted me that I was a cold person, that real wives stand by their husbands, that I'd never really been part of the family anyway. That last one I think was meant to hurt. It did, a little. Not because it was an insult, but because it was the first honest thing she'd said to me in 3 years. The house went under contract in 9 days. When I tell people that, they usually react with some version of satisfaction, like it's a punchline, the 9 days, the speed of it, but it didn't feel like a punchline to me. It felt like math. The market was good. The house was in good condition. I had kept it in good condition because I lived there and I cared about where I lived. It sold because it was worth selling. My mother-in-law found out from my husband, who found out from me when I texted him the accepted offer amount and the closing date, because legally he was entitled to that information. She called my mother. I didn't know they had each other's numbers. Apparently they connected at our wedding. My mother called me after and said, "Your mother-in-law just called me and said you sold your home while your husband was away." I said that was roughly accurate if you left out about 30 other things. My mother said, "Do you want to tell me the whole story?" And I said yes, and I did. My mother was quiet for a while after. Then she said, "I wish you had told me sooner." I said I know. I closed on the house on a Thursday. By the time the funds cleared and the settlement was finalised, I had enough to put a substantial down payment on a small house in a different part of Columbus. Just mine. My name only on the deed. I moved in on a Saturday in June. I drove my own car full of my own things, and my sister flew in from Portland and helped me unpack. And we ordered Thai food and sat on the floor of the living room because I didn't have furniture yet, just boxes, and it was the most comfortable I had felt in 4 years. I'm writing this, or I'm telling you this, however you want to think about it, because I spent a long time in that house waiting for things to change without doing anything to change them. I kept thinking patience was a virtue. I kept thinking if I was agreeable enough, if I worked hard enough, if I just absorbed enough without complaining, eventually the people around me would see what I was contributing and something would shift. It didn't shift. People rarely see what they're not looking for. What I know now is that I confused endurance with strength. They are not the same thing. Endurance is surviving something. Strength is deciding what you will and won't survive. I also want to say this, because I think it's the part people skip over. I felt guilty for a long time, not about selling the house. I was legally and financially entitled to do what I did, and my attorney made sure of that. I felt guilty about leaving. About not trying harder. About the marriage not working. I felt guilty even though I had sat on a bar stool at Thanksgiving in my own house. I felt guilty even though there was an $11,400 credit card debt built on my income that no one had bothered to mention to me. Guilt doesn't care about fairness. That's the thing no one tells you. You can be completely in the right and still feel like you've done something wrong, because you were taught that keeping the peace was your job. It wasn't my job. It was never my job. The house my mother-in-law called her son's home sold for $406,000 after the mortgage payoff and costs. My share of the net proceeds was substantial. Enough, with everything else from the settlement, to start over cleanly. I left a note in the house before I handed over the keys at closing. I tucked it in the kitchen drawer, the one by the stove, the one I always kept rubber bands and takeout menus in. It was a short note. It didn't say much. It said, "I hope whoever lives here feels at home. I'm finally going to." I don't know if the new owners found it. I like to think they did. My sister texted me the week after I moved in. She said, "How does it feel?" I thought about it for a minute before I answered. I said, "Like I finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to carry." She sent back a single heart emoji. It was enough. I don't talk to my ex-husband's family anymore. I don't talk to my ex-husband much either. We communicate through our attorneys when we need to, which is rarely now. He sent me a text a few months after everything was final. It said he was sorry things had ended the way they had. I read it twice and then I put my phone down and made myself a cup of coffee and stood at the window of my own kitchen in my own house and watched the leaves doing whatever leaves do in October. I didn't write back. Not because I was being cold, the way his sister said, but because there was nothing left to say that would have changed anything that had already happened, and I had stopped spending energy on things that didn't change anything. That, more than the house, more than the money, more than the settlement, that is the thing I am most proud of. Knowing when you're done is its own kind of intelligence. I learned it late. But I learned it, if you're somewhere in the middle of what I was in. Keeping the peace, making yourself small, waiting for someone to notice what you're doing. I want to tell you something I wish someone had said to me directly. Without softening it, they see it. They just don't think it costs them anything. The moment you let them know it does, everything changes. It might not change the way you hoped. It didn't for me, not entirely. I lost the marriage and the version of the future I'd planned in my head. That's a real loss, and I won't pretend it isn't. But I live in a house where I pick the seating arrangement, where the mortgage payment comes from my account and goes towards something that is entirely mine, where if someone leaves dishes in the sink, it's my dishes, and I deal with them on my own schedule. It is a quiet life. It is mine. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I thought a lot about why it took me so long. Not the legal part. That moved faster than I expected once I decided to move. I mean the deciding. The 4 years before the deciding. I keep coming back to that because I think that's the part that actually matters. The part that's harder to explain than signing a settlement agreement or handing over keys at closing. I was good at absorbing things. I'd learned it early. Keep the peace. Be agreeable. Don't make it harder than it has to be. And for a long time I told myself that was maturity, that I was being the bigger person. But there's a difference between being the bigger person and being the person everyone else stands on top of without noticing. I confused those two things for 4 years, and it cost me not just financially, though it cost me that too. It cost me something quieter, the habit of trusting my own read on a situation, the reflex of saying out loud what I actually thought. What I know now is that every time I absorbed something I should have addressed, I was teaching the people around me what I would accept. Not intentionally. They weren't calculating it either, not consciously, but that's how it works. Behaviour that goes without consequence becomes behaviour that gets repeated. My mother-in-law arranged a Thanksgiving seating chart that put me at the kitchen counter in my own house, and nobody said a word, including me. And so the next year she planned a trip to Portugal that I wasn't on, and that nobody thought to mention for 9 months. These things were connected. The silence in one room made space for the erasure in the next. I'm not saying I deserved any of it. I'm saying I participated in it longer than I had to. And that's worth being honest about. Not to punish myself, but because honesty is the only thing that actually changes the pattern going forward. The intelligence I'm most grateful for now isn't the kind that got me through school or built my savings account. It's the slower kind. The kind that eventually made me sit at a kitchen table with an $11,000 credit card statement in front of me and say quietly, to no one in particular, "This is the last thing." Knowing that it was the last thing, not dramatically, not in anger, just clearly. Sloane. I'm talking about myself, I know, but it feels strange to frame it any other way. Sloane stayed too long because she kept believing that the people around her would eventually see what she was doing and respond to it. They didn't. And the moment she stopped waiting for that, the moment she accepted that her worth in that house was never going to be recognised by the people living in it, She got very quiet and very practical and very free. That's what I want to leave you with, if you're somewhere in the middle of what I was in. Nobody is coming to acknowledge what you've been carrying. That acknowledgement has to come from you first. Once it does, once you see clearly what you've contributed and what you've been given in return, the next step tends to become obvious. It might be a hard step. It might cost you things you didn't plan to lose. But the weight you set down will be heavier than anything you lose. That's not a promise. It's just what happened to me.